In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez used oil reserves. And a part of what he was able to do was invest the profits from those oil reserves, nationalize the oil reserves, and spread them around to the communities, largely, folks of indigenous people, people of African descent who were poor.
Right?
Do you agree with Marxism?
Embrace Marxism.
I think there are aspects of their useful insights in Marxism that I think are important.
Right.
If these things are so successful, why isn't it the system that is dominating?
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. They said in no unmistakable terms that the Negro people, because of their secondary social status and their predominant working class composition, offered greater revolutionary possibilities than any other cross-section of the population. To develop these possibilities, the communists proclaimed that the American Negro constituted a separate nation within a nation, a colony within the continental borders of the United States. The people of this nation were said to be oppressed and exploited by colonialist, imperialist, racist America. Consequently, the Communist Party called for their liberation, their right to self-determination, to break away from the United States and to set up their own nation within our borders.
Welcome to Just the Guys Podcast.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time you're watching this. Welcome back to Just the Guys, where our mission is simple. It's to bring back shame, because shame is the feedback necessary to correct what's destroying our communities. And far too often, what's destroying our communities is rooted in ideas that push us away from responsibility and towards centralized control. Guys, make sure you hit that like, share, and subscribe. And also you can join the Shamers Club. It really helps to support the show. So tonight we're doing something a little different, that seems to be rare in 2025. Two worldviews having a real conversation instead of going to war like you see on TV all the time. But before we get into the socialism versus capitalism debate, I want to start with something Manning Johnson wrote over 70 years ago, a warning that feels almost prophetic today. He said, "The communists made the Negro intellectual the leader in their attack upon our cultural and moral traditions. Knowing he could influence the masses, they used him to advance the cause of socialism under the guise of racial progress." Whether you agree with him or not, Johnson's point was simple. Ideas don't enter the community by accident. They enter through trusted voices. We've forgotten how to talk with people we disagree with. We built echo chambers, we built ideological bubbles, we built racial silos, political silos, intellectual silos. But conversations like this, that's the only way a free society stays free. And that's why this conversation tonight matters. Because for decades, as Manning Johnson warned, debates about socialism, capitalism, race, and power have been happening about Black communities and not with them. So tonight we're actually bringing on Dayvon Love. He's joining us, and we're doing right now what America, Baltimore, this whole country needs. We're putting ideas on the table openly, honestly, respectfully, and letting people hear both sides. Welcome, Dayvon. So Dayvon, how can people find you? Tell us a little bit about yourself real quick.
So I'm Dayvon Love. I'm Director of Public Policy and co-founder of an organization called Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, grassroots political think tank, advocate for issues explicitly for and about Black people. You can find me on all your relevant social media, lbsbaltimore.com. And let me just say one other thing by way of introduction. I want to say that I'm appreciative of the opportunity to engage you all on this platform, and to the point that you raised about there not being conversations of clashing worldviews. That's particularly why I'm super interested in this conversation. Like, for us to be able to have rigorous conversations, for people to watch it and then walk away, believing whatever they believe, but people being able to actually see the test of ideas. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
All right, guys, let's get right into it, man. Dayvon, I actually want to start with you. Like, what is socialism? And what is capitalism in your view?
I'm going to start by just giving some background just on my perspective of worldview, so we can have a more precise conversation about these two systems. As I mentioned with my organization, we have what I would describe as a revolutionary Pan-African nationalist worldview. What that means is that we're clear that America is a settler colony, that America was founded on the basis of genocide, white supremacy, colonialism, and imperialism, that people of African descent were brought to this country, and that's an act of war. And so for us, our perspective is that it's important for Black prior to colonialism, prior to the intervention of the project of European domination of the world, right? That's been the past 500 years of human history has been defined by this project of European domination of the world. That what we lost as a people was we lost the sovereignty to operate all of those life-preserving institutions that are necessary for a people to thrive, right? That we lost control of those institutions, transportation, water, food systems, health, all of these things as our collective station in our society today is owned, operated, and controlled by those who are the legatees of the system of colonialism and white supremacy. So I start with that framework because when we talk about these different systems, we have to talk about our understanding of what we know about history. And most people in this society are socialized in an understanding of history that primarily focuses on this past 500 years and the way that Europeans and the European Enlightenment has narrated history prior to that, centering on Greece and Rome. The examples of capitalism and socialism that I'm going to, particularly examples of socialism that I'm going to refer to today, are many of them non-Western civilizations that many of us are not in our professional training, right? In whatever our public school training is, many of us have not actually rigorously engaged how those societies were configured.
So for the sake of time, how do you
Yep.
personally define socialism and communism? I mean, and capitalism.
Right. So capitalism, there are kind of three major elements to a capitalist system that again emerges from, Europe's transition from a feudal system to the kind of contemporary capitalist framework. The first is the valorization of private property. One is that the valorization of individual liberty, right, as the basis for people understanding their relation to the world, and the valorization of markets as, in many respects, the force that resolves political conflict and understand and characterizes what is valued, how commodities understood and the like. So those I would describe, and these are broad concepts, but those are the three things that I would say are defining features of the capitalism that is practiced in modern history.
Okay, what about socialism?
So socialism, and it comes, in a variety of different forms. It is first and foremost making sure that there is a safety net that ensures that people's basic needs are met, right? Food, water, transportation, right? As examples of those kinds of basic needs. Secondly, socialism is about having a political economy, like having a structure of government that actually reflects the will of the vast majority of the people, right? Because as a contrast to the capitalist system, so much wealth, influence, power is concentrated into a small handful. So socialist societies are structured in ways that do not concentrate too much power, right, in individual people or institutions, right? And then I would say, lastly, again, as because I'm zeroing it down to kind of the bare essentials. I would say the third thing that's a component of socialism is that there's an understanding that the world, the earth, produces way more than what is necessary to fulfill the needs of what people on planet Earth need. And so that socialism recognizes that it's not about trying to produce wealth, but it's about how to properly operationalize the distribution of the abundance that the earth provides to humanity in order to ensure that, again, people have what they need. So it's just a recognition of the abundance that exists on planet Earth and structuring a system that recognizes that abundance, as opposed to a capitalist system that sees the earth in the context of scarcity, right? And then distributes resources and power on the basis of this notion that there is scarcity.
I was fooled by those words too. For years, without even realizing it, I was helping the bad guys. Yeah, the same global conglomerates that bankroll chaos, push woke nonsense, and fund movements that despise God, family, and freedom. 97% of what we buy, toothpaste, dish soap, vitamins, even snacks, is owned by the same handful of multinational corporations. They don't share our values, they exploit them. Most of their stuff is made overseas, laced with toxins, and sold back to us under the label of progress. That's not capitalism, that's communist goal number 32. Centralized control over culture, welfare, and daily life. They already control education. They control the media. And now they want your shopping cart. If we keep buying their products, we're handing them the keys. Shame isn't the problem. Apathy is. Shame is what snaps you out of it. It's what makes a man take responsibility again. That's why I stopped feeding the machine. I switched my home to family-owned, American-made, non-toxic products that actually care about the people they serve. And now you can too. Go to switchwithlogic.com and take your dollars back from the system that's poisoning our homes and our freedom. Because shame should lead to change. And this one feels good. How do you respond to, I guess, the critiques of capitalism, as well as the advocacy for socialism, as Dayvon just mentioned?
Well, I'll start off by saying any system created by humans is going to be fallible. There is a decent amount of criticism of capitalism, especially as it's practiced, which, in my opinion, is not pure capitalism. There's no way you come through 2008 and that whole bailout and call that capitalism. In fact, if you look back, starting in 1971, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, you'll see periodic, they happen about every decade or so, pretty substantial wealth transfers from the taxpayer to the to various institutions, be they the financial infrastructure in the case of 2008, or the retail industry in 2020. There's definitely, I'm not coming on here with blinders on and trying to sell a story that capitalism is infallible. There are two systems that work that are at work in this nation, in this world, and pretty much capitalism and socialism. Now, I did want to ask, because there's plenty of objective criticism for socialism, and you threw a lot at us, and I get it. You wanted to state your case. It's a lot to digest, but I did want to ask you a couple of really quick questions. You spoke about sovereignty and as you characterized it, an act of war in describing the slave trade. Would you not agree that that act of war had as one of the originators and enablers those West African countries that violated the sovereignty of human beings in their practice of taking slaves and then trading them to Europeans? Would you agree with that?
I would say that the historical record reflects that it is the European slave traders that created the market and that initiated the military activity that created the environment where it was where those complicit African tribes and societies, it became in their interest to be complicit in a global system that if they had not participated, others would have forced the complicity in the trade of enslavement. In other words, it's not like these were folks that were equally, a part of the process of enslavement. These are folks for whom, there was an entire industry and decrees from the church, from European governments. They were the ones that essentially created the context where the complicity took place.
Isn't it true that the tribes that made slaves available, you're right in that the market was created by the Europeans, but the supply was created by the West Africans that sold people into slavery? Is not that accurate?
I would say it's similar to the Juderon during the World War II, during the Holocaust. There were Jewish collaborators who helped to sell and helped to essentially be a complicit in the Holocaust of European Jews. We wouldn't say that Jews were equally complicit in their Holocaust, we would say that they were Jewish collaborators. And so similarly, I think what you're describing are folks who were complicit in a system they had no power or control. They were complicit in that larger system. In terms of military, in terms of other kinds of exploitation, I think that to place them on equal ground as the slave traders, to me, defies the historical record.
Okay, well, we'll have to respectfully disagree on that. I think that is a trope that relieves the West African apparatus of culpability. And I think that a lot of people with ideology similar to yours use that as kind of a salve to give them some cover. So respectfully, we'll disagree there. The last thing I'll ask you, based on your opening statement, has to do with, yes, we agree. The earth does provide resources. There's literally so much oil coming out of the ground that in parts of the Arabias, you just see fires burning, just spontaneously, right, in the desert. But when we talk about the processing of, let's just take oil, in the socialist system, who extracts that resource, refines it, transports it? Explain how that gets done in a socialist environment.
It depends on the specific system. As you mentioned, there are a variety of different ways that different societies practice capitalism. I think, so what I'll do is I'll reference just a couple of examples of societies. So you think about what is now the Northeast region of the United States, which at the time prior to the genocide of Native peoples was initiated, was the Iroquois Nation. Iroquois Nation, in fact, many of the so-called founding fathers, and they actually developed their understanding of governments, of a democratic system, from observing the kind of democratic caucuses and systems of the Iroquois Nation. And so a part of their system of governance actually had to do with the recognition that in the example that you're getting, and of course we're talking about using oil, which is a contemporary set of, it's a demand produced by this society and what powers it.
Well, it has been out there for over 100 years.
Right, no, I'm just saying that I'm using a historical example.
I got you.
You know what I'm saying? So we're talking about natural resources, right? And we're talking about like how would a society like that share a commodity that is understood to be a natural resource that is valuable. Then I think a part of it would be an assessment of what does the community need to be functional, right? How much or what is the nature of how this should be distributed in a way that is functional for the society to operate, taking out of it the profit motive. Because when you've included the profit motive, then what you've done is then it doesn't become about meeting the needs of the community itself, right? It creates a context where people are competing in order to maximize their profits. And this doesn't translate to meeting the needs of the community. So there would be an assessment made as to how will this resource be distributed in a way that would be best for the overall community. And whatever system that they would have set up in terms of how because they wouldn't be using oil in the Iroquois Nation, but however, whatever the resource is, they would develop a process by which it would meet the needs of the community.
So when we talk about actually, because I think you would agree that in the modern society, oil is going to be something that we need, right? But again, who in the socialist system contemporarily, what apparatus incentivizes people to go look for it, extract it, refine it, transport it?
So I'll give you a modern example. Venezuela, Hugo Chavez. What Hugo Chavez was able to do was he's able to use the oil deposits in Venezuela in order to buttress economic institutions that were not dependent on Western civilization.
Sorry, I can't anymore. I apologize very respectfully, sir, but there are so many things you say that make massive assumptions about things. For starters, the Arab slave trade predates your entire slave argument. They were dragging you east long before they were ever dragging you west. So you can argue all you want about whatever motivated it to go west. The Arabs were doing it for thousands of years. And you know why there are no slave communities in the Middle East? Descendants, right? Middle Eastern descendants of slaves. It's because they castrated all the slaves they brought because you weren't worthy of being reproduced. You were easier to just transport more from Africa. So there's a massive difference altogether in your assessment on that. That's one. Two, you were never in charge of any industries. You're talking about a history that didn't exist. There was no great Pan-African nations that had massive advancements. You guys were shot up with muskets. You were throwing spears. They came and they dominated you with their technology. You weren't even a competition. You were so not a competition, your own sold you out because it was easier to turn a profit than it was to compete. So let's end that nonsense. Then you're talking about that we should take everybody from their ability and move it to their needs. But you don't take into account that that's all managed by people who are going to determine whose needs are what. Now you're taking their self-determination away from everyone and handing it to a body called the government that you believe is always going to make the right choice. We have demonstration that there was no motivation. There is no motivation for anything. You know how you know? At the end of the USSR, 60% of the country didn't have indoor plumbing. Okay? There's no motivation. There is none of that. There is no innovation. There's no growth. All those things that come in China in the end of the USSR come from adopting forms of capitalism. And then to say that the government entity is somehow going to assess that everyone's needs, let's look at the UK or Canada, where you get arrested for standing up and saying things like, I don't know, UK is for English people. You have governance on speech, you have governance on everything in order to ensure that everyone to their needs. And the people who determine those needs are medical boards that tell the elderly they got to wait for cataract surgery till they're almost blind. And all the major research and development in science is done in free markets. They come here for the experimental treatments. And then when we offer them and offer to pay for them, that's still not enough. Case in example, the family in England that wanted to bring their kid here totally free of the NIH. The NIH was going to put them in jail for it. We see every single day, everything you say does not translate into the real world, from the worst forms of it in communism to the best forms of it. And I say that with the most respect in all the socialist nations in the world. You throw any rock into the pond of any socialist country, the ripples knock the whole country apart. Greece almost collapsed. Italy almost collapsed. It took the entirety of the EU to literally put them into austerity to make any progress. You're looking at some of the most wealthiest nations crumble under the own weight of their socialist systems. You made a statement about the Jews who collaborated. No. As a Jew, the capo is worse than the Nazi.
Okay, so first, is that when you think about the slave trade, there was an Arab slave trade. The West African slave trade, we talk about chattel slavery, which is a unique form of slavery that did not exist anywhere on the planet prior to it. What you saw on the East African slave trade was you did see indentured servitude. You did see forms of domination and oppression by Arabs of people of African descent, which actually contributes to many of the conflicts we see in that part of the world. If you see Sudan and many of the revolutions that it's engaged in, right? So those conflicts actually still impact that part of Africa, and there is culpability of those who engage in the East African slave trade. But the West African slave trade, and that was initiated by Europeans, is the system that dominates the world. The global capitalist imperialist system emanates from that particular practice of chattel slavery, which has very little parallels in human history. And if we're talking about like sources for that, because one of the things which you said that I'm glad you said it, when you talked about this notion of Africans not having any competition. I mean, the literature, the historical record of ancient African civilizations. So I see someone mention the Moors, right, who were a mixture of Africans and Arabs, because there was a period of time where there was actually some collaboration and equity. But if we think about the historical record, the first urban city, Howard Finch, a historian, he documents the fact that in the oldest city in the world was, we call Memphis. So if you know Memphis and their sports arena, that was a pyramid. A part of why their sports arena was a pyramid is because the first urban city in world history was Memphis in ancient Africa. They had some of the most advanced civilization in the world in terms of systems of even governance, systems of health. Right? That right.
Hold on. Hey guys, one voice.
You are assimilating things that are not mainstream accepted. You are making statements that historical scholars argue, including the whole nation of Egypt. You're trying to take credit for something that isn't yours. You were throwing spears at men with muskets, sir. And you're trying to say that you were competition for these men. You were not competition, you were dominated. And to say that there's some form of slavery different or worse than the other, there is no slavery in the West, there is still slavery in the East. To this day, inside of Africa, including. And you're trying to confuse the Arab conquering of North Africa with things blacks did. The Moors are from Arab descent. That from their conquering of those areas, I'm sorry, you are trying to assimilate and take credit for things that belong to another people. Okay.
No.
Sir.
All right, so I want to bring Isaiah in here because
wait, hold on, Jamal, hold on.
We got to bring Isaiah
because this was part of the thing that I was concerned about, because I should get the equal time. It's 5
Oh no,
of
you've been talking most of the podcast. Isaiah.
Last time I checked, you're the only communist here. Last time I checked, you're the only communist here. You knew what you were getting into, brother.
Right. So Isaiah has
had
had zero time right now
to what he said.
So in other words, you want to dominate is what it sounds like.
No. So anyway, Isaiah, go ahead, because we're still,
because I've had enough of this as well. Dayvon, everything you said is no different than what George Fredrickson wrote many years ago. Okay, where he said that equity is a planned political economy in which shares are adjusted so that citizens are made equal. You want to be the one thing that strikes me about communism is that you talk about these global systems, you talk about these totalizing systems, you talk about globalism as if they're these horrid systems that you want to get rid of. No, you want to be in charge of them. You want to be in charge of them. You want to be the ones who get to make the decisions. You want to be the ones who sit in the bureaucracies. You're the ones who want to order people's lives according to your ultimate agenda. This is socialism 101. You mentioned something at the beginning of your statement where you said, I forget the word you used, but like the pedestalization of the individual, and basically taking the individual's ability away from them to provide for oneself. What's wrong with that? Why can't the individual produce for oneself without needing an all-powerful state to lead to order his footsteps? And the second thing I wanted to ask you, you talk about the abundance of the earth. You mentioned that in your first statement. How in the world can we take advantage? This is kind of to Tyrone's point. How in the world can we enjoy the abundance of the earth without work? That's a sense. I mean, that's basically what you're saying, that we're just going to enjoy abundance that the state plans for us to have while not working for it and having our needs met by the state from each according to one's ability and to each according to one's need. Like, come on, man. And in all honesty, your version of socialism from an ethnic perspective, from a black perspective, it's just the usual tropes of social vengeance. You're promoting vengeance for a type of slavery for a system that none of us, no black person that's alive today has ever gone through that.
A couple of things. One, and I'll start with the last set of comments first, is that, and I'm gonna go back to the example that I was gonna give. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez used oil reserves. And a part of what he was able to do was invest the profits from those oil reserves, nationalize the oil reserves, and spread them around to the communities, largely, folks of indigenous people of African descent who were poor. And a big part of what was able to get him elected was the fact that he was someone who championed those who were poor against the U.S. installed, right? These are all facts. U.S. installed puppet regimes that essentially were using their access to Venezuela oil reserves to enrich them. A part of what the West did was that they partnered with the trade unions in Venezuela and engaged in economic strangulation. Because if the world system is dominated by the United States and Western interests, then they can engage in an economic strangulation of those that go against the systems of governance that they're interested in. And so what Hugo Chavez was able to do was invest in development of community-based hubs of organization, such that when he passed away and Maduro took power, that a part of when there was the extreme strangulation by the West, right, at the zenith of the partnership between those trade unions, what ended up happening was they were able to organize some of the resources to deal with the economic depression they were dealing with because of the investments that Hugo Chavez and his regime had made to those communities that would have otherwise starved as a result of it. So that's an example. So that's not an issue of people not working. It is about
so hold on a second. Let me just break in here real quick. So why? No, you don't get. No, you're going to get challenged. Why?
Yeah,
is it then that Venezuela is still so poor?
I didn't interrupt anybody else.
Why are they so
poor?
Hold
on, let him finish, because I'm trying to hear the story of how Venezuela is the beacon shining example of how socialism works.
Because I'm okay with being challenged, but let me finish like I let y'all finish. I think on the other, so that's one piece of it. I think on the other piece, to the gentleman that was talking about Africa was no competition, I think part of the problem is that the most advanced civilizations, many of them were indigenous and ancient African civilizations that had major food distributions. I mean, even during 2,000 years ago, you had places in Nubia that had populations of 3 million people when London was at 80,000, when Paris was at 200,000, right? So we're talking about very well advanced civilizations. The problem is that many of the public education that people are trained to socialize into, they wouldn't know any of that. They wouldn't have known any of that. But the historical evidence is so clear, right? Sheikh Anta Diop in 1974 at the UNESCO conference, he was doing battle with a group of Egyptologists. He and Teofilo Benga were the only African Egyptologists that were there. And the purpose of the discussion there was to determine the racial designation of the ancient Egyptians. And he was the only one of the Egyptologists who was a master in chemistry and physics and innovated the melanin dosage test, where he was able to go to those tombs and determine that those societies outlived by thousands of years any of the most advanced civilizations from Greece and Rome. So a part of why that point is important is because the formula for how to organize societies that many of us are socialized into, we only know Europe because of the mythology of Europe being this advanced civilization. There are certainly advanced things about the society that we live in, but many of us don't even know enough about non-Western civilizations and how they were organized to be able to have a credible organization about how do you structure a world and what are the best systems for it.
You're asking people to unlearn by force, because it's always force when it comes to socialism and communism being the end result. You're asking people to unlearn normal society by force, and you're giving all of these examples, these skewed examples, which honestly, the only reason why you would even be able to explore this and say, well, maybe we should try this, is because we live in a Western society. We live in the freest society on planet Earth. And so again, like I don't understand where this is coming from. What makes you the arbiter? What makes you the arbiter of all of this?
Historical study.
Historical study. Okay.
Because you talk about being well studied, right? And I think one of the often things that gets overlooked is how well studied even the founding fathers of this country were. I mean, they were, brilliant. They studied different forms of government, different types of systems in order to form the Constitution of this United States. What credit do we give the founding fathers in even determining the system? Because it seems like even that gets overlooked in your argument. Because if you study Thomas Jefferson or George Washington and look at, even their education of how they studied ancient Greece or New Latin or New Greek or knew how to not just read and they understood and interpreted the language to form what we have as a constitution. And it wasn't just them alone. It was a bunch of people. So how do you, I guess, reconcile that and the fact that it was America who were first in ending the slave trade because of Christianity? Like, so how do we kind of reconcile all of those pieces in saying we don't know anything because of based on Western cultures or anything like that? Like, how do you reconcile that?
The point that I'm making is that in our society, the nature of the kind of education that many of us receive, wherever you get your formal education, that the overwhelming majority of that education does not address itself to histories outside of that curated by Western civilization.
So how is your education different?
Well,
right, because your education is curated, right? Because even into a socialist communist worldview, it was curated by a certain set of ideas, certain set of facts in order for you to get to where you are today. So how do you examine that?
A part of the point that I'm making about the nature of how people are traditionally socialized and trained. So my background is actually in intercollegiate policy debate. The person that trained me is a person who was a student of Jan Carew out of the Pan-African Studies Department at University of Louisville. And many of those Pan-African Studies departments, Black Studies departments, many of them were created by student agitation, right? Some of them took over, schools and college buildings and made demands on the curriculum. So the information that I'm describing, right, that as a part of my study, I was fortunate to have been trained by somebody that comes from an institution that carved out space for this kinds of knowledge to be present in the spaces that I was in.
So who created the
Along
stuff that they knew?
institutions work then for you, obviously.
No, man. Like, who created the information that they got, right? Because you're talking about student protests. You're talking about these are all communist goals. They were written into the communist record or the congressional record, rather, back in 1963, in a book from the Naked Communists. So this is nothing new when you're speaking about these things. There's 45 communist goals that were documented. So student protest was one of the communist goals and communist objective. So what you're telling me is that the process in which you formulated your basis of opinion came out of the school of thought of communism.
No, that's not what I'm saying. So George Padmore, in his book, Pan-Africanism or Communism, the introduction was written by Richard Wright. And one of the things he says is that one of the mistakes that European intellectuals make is that all resistance is often reduced to communism, especially when it comes to Black people. And his argument is that many of the resistance movements to U.S. domination of the world, right, and European domination of the world, predates Marx and Engels and them. Now, that doesn't mean that there are folks who incorporated, right, aspects of Marxism as a part of their analysis, but to reduce like Black studies and Pan-Africanism to it being a direct line to communism, there are a variety of different forms of intellectual traditions, some that embrace aspects of Marxism, some that do not.
Right?
Do you agree with Marxism?
Embrace Marxism.
I think there are aspects of their useful insights in Marxism that I think are important.
Right.
So which aspect is not important?
Please.
So
you do understand that ultimately, if you want to use those Marxist ideals to change the way a capitalist economy works, you're promoting communism, because that's what their target is to change the economics and then use it as a form of control. That's what you're promoting. So it doesn't matter that you don't want to be associated or aligned or be reduced to being called a communist. But from my capitalist perspective, where my ultimate goal is to protect the engine that keeps me free, which is the economy, you are just a communist, sir.
And I understand why you would say that. I think a closer, more rigorous reading of the different ways that people are politically organized, those differences are actually pretty meaningful. A part of an example of it being meaningful, and I'm gonna go back then to the question that Giovanni, you raised, was that the curation of history and how that impacts people's thinking. I was working with a debate coach. He's a gentleman that's very learned in African history. And he said to me one time, he said, Dayvon, you know, Africans were navigating the oceans before Europeans were. And my initial reaction was, here we go with these. I was 20 years old. I said, man, here we go with these conspiracy theories. Like, you know, this impacts our ability to have good conversations. Then I, saw a YouTube video, Ivan Van Sertima, They Came Before Columbus. And then I read the book. And there were two conclusions that I came to that were really important conclusions. The first was that the historical evidence on Africans traveling the ocean is overwhelming, right? I mean, the genealogical, architectural evidence, it's overwhelming. But then the second thing, I had to ask myself, why was I so willing to be dismissive of the idea? And what I figured out is that in my own training, even as a person who considers themselves race conscious about social justice, all of that, I was clear that I had not interacted or had not internalized narratives of people of African descent operating in arenas marked as high levels of civilization. That it was beyond my conception, because much of the stuff that I had been taught, right, in my formal education made that notion sound ridiculous to me. But that makes sense given the kind of education I've received and all of the things that I'm saying. I can give you historical. Christopher Columbus was the first person to say that Africans were in the Americas before Europeans were, in his own diary, which is part of what Van Sertima documents. But for some people, that very notion disrupts their needing to believe that Europe is the center of the world, a progenitor of all of civilization. So to your question about my own education, I had to be in a place where I was trained and educated by a person, by a network of folks that challenge the very kinds of education that is made available to all of us, which then creates very reductive, right, very kind of simplistic understandings of how the world is organized and configured.
Critical consciousness, your pathway through it just happened to be through some historical pipeline in a Western college.
All right, hold on for a second.
No difference, sir.
So I would like to ask, where has socialism worked?
So now let's actually start like quoting history since,
no, let's think modern day. Where can we see good modern examples?
Let me what I mentioned to you about Venezuela. that the global economic order has economic strangulation against those nations that try to challenge.
Shouldn't the economic system be able to defend itself, though? Like, I mean, if we have a successful economic system, shouldn't it be able to withstand the strangle you're talking about? But back to my question, where has socialism worked?
Not if the most powerful country in the world that has the biggest military of all the military combined is able to tell the world, if you do business with Cuba or Venezuela or any of these other places,
Dude,
right? That economic.
All right, hold on, one mic, guys. Let him finish.
That economic strangulation makes it difficult. Now, I mentioned Venezuela. I also mentioned Bolivia, right? Bolivia is another example, and it's also a place that back in 2020, the United States tried to install and temporarily did install a Western puppet, right? That adhered to the Western capitalist orthodoxy, right? But Evo Morales, who in Bolivia was sitting on deposits of lithium, was able to actually develop parts of Bolivia that had not been developed before, because he nationalized those deposits that Western corporations were privatizing and using it for the benefit of those in the West. But Bolivia was able to maintain itself long enough. But again, we can't discount the fact that the United States, which many other countries are dependent on, right? World Trade Organization, IMF, these are international formations that the United States controls essentially. And if they tell people don't do business with them, then it does make it almost impossible for a socialist country to flourish under this global system of capitalism, imperialist white supremacy.
All right. So with the case of Cuba, you do realize that Cuba has an embargo that has fluctuated over the recent years. Obama relaxed some of it, but you do realize that tiny nation has been trading pretty much the rest of the world. Okay. You realize that, right?
You're saying it's been trading the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, France didn't have an embargo with them.
Canada didn't have an embargo.
The United States established an embargo that countries cannot do business with America if they do business with Cuba.
That's bullshit. Canada
that is not accurate. That is not accurate,
sir. Canada, you can go buy Cuban cigars in Canada right now, authentic from Cuba.
We're not talking about individual commodities. I'm saying that trade relationships.
Oh my God, dude!
Come on, dude.
People go on vacation to Cuba from Toronto.
Yes, you can go on vacation.
They literally have open.
And that's Dayvon,
that's not living the reality that exists on this plane, sir, when you make those statements. Because one, Russia, as the USSR, installed leaders all over the world. Mao Zedong, Pol Pot. You want to talk about the influence of communism going around and meddling in other countries, then we can have a fair debate, because communist countries, when they're big enough and powerful enough, they interfere just as much as you're complaining about the United States. Your only problem clearly is you don't like the United States and what it sells. You like that it's okay China's going around installing leadership, buying countries with its Belt and Road Initiative, raping Africa by taking control of all its infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative. But you only throw smoke at capitalism. Let me finish arguments you use about influence, political power, economic force, all can be applied to communist superpowers as well when they were superpowers.
All right, Gimpy, listen. My thrust here is not to so much delve into the history or the philosophy, but to ask Dayvon to demonstrate how this works practically in the modern global economy. Okay, so Dayvon, respectfully, I believe that you may want to look deeper into the relationship between the European countries and Cuba. Okay, the United States was effectively the only country to step out on that embargo. I worked in France, and they asked me, do you want to fly back into Cuba? Now, Cuba, we know, does a lot of agricultural business. One of the main industries they've had is tourism. So flying into Cuba means a hell of a lot to their economy. You know, the economy they have to speak of. When you mentioned Venezuela, and again, I'm talking about the practical economic realities of this. From April of this year to up to last week, Venezuela's inflation rate went from 180% to 250%. That's hyperinflation. I'm sure you agree. You've seen and this is the part I really want to get your opinion on. You've seen a brain drain from Venezuela that amounts to about 7 million people. That's damn near 25% of their population. Why do you see things like that? you saw folk risking barbed wire, a cement wall, and landmines to get the hell out of East Germany. Why do we see that kind of desperation from socialist structures and you don't see it from capitalist structures?
So, as I mentioned before, with Venezuela and the kind of economic strangulation, I mentioned the collaboration with the trade unions and other Western forces. So in 2002 in Venezuela, there was a coup that lasted 2 days where they overthrew Hugo Chavez, and who they installed was a person who was committed and had connection to those folks who were private, who wanted private ownership of the oil reserves. So what ends up happening now, he takes power back. And then I mentioned many of the different villages or communes that he invested using the nationalization of those resources, giving to those different kind of collective community-based bodies, distributing land, right, to folks to be able to farm off of. And so what ends up happening is that the United States further engages in that economic strangulation, right, making it difficult for them to do trade, right? And it creates a context where then if countries are disincentivized with doing business with you, right? And I want to be clear that, socialism isn't about not doing business, right? It is about making sure that the profit motive isn't the priority, but that is making sure that resources are distributed in a way that you have a functional society. So
that's why y'all hoover through other people's money.
So if you create a context where you can't do business with large swaths of the world, right, then it creates a context, and then you add to it, right, what the Clinton administration did with NAFTA, right? And basically gutting, fair trade, creating a context where you have then a bunch of countries, Venezuela and a bunch of South and Latin America included, where it's a race to the bottom, where transnational corporations are going where they can get the cheapest labor.
Okay, well,
right?
Respectfully, we've been affected by that here. Also, okay. The last thing I'll say on this subject is, because you held their oil industry out as an example.
Mm-hmm.
They were producing 3 million barrels of oil in the early 90s. They are producing on average 800,000 barrels today. These are per day figures. So their oil production has dropped significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's their oil. As you said, they are running the show. So are we seeing this break down in the same way that the Marxists in South Africa have not been able to, for example, maintain their desalination infrastructure? Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, I would say it this way. I think that the period of time from 2002 to present day with Venezuela, right? So we're talking a window of a little over 20 years, countering years of a U.S.-backed regime that took those resources, extracted them, and sent them back to American and Western corporations. What we're seeing in South Africa is a similar thing, where part of the failure of the ANC, right, was that there were many people who benefited individually, right, from the shift in, after apartheid, right? And so you don't actually have like a Marxist system in South Africa. You have a similar problem.
The EFF would beg to differ.
Well,
the EFF would beg to differ.
Well, the EFF
would beg to differ.
Well, the EFF is an enemy of the ANC and wants to push the country further to the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with the EFF.
And
right?
and they have significant political power. Would you not agree?
Well, I agree. One of the things they were actually able to do in South Africa was around land expropriation without compensation, right? Because 80% of the land ownership in South Africa are white folks, right? And that doesn't make sense in a place where indigenously it's the African people who should be owners, but it was the project of colonialism as to why those folks own the land there. So that's still
not your determination to make.
Okay.
Well, here's the
determination to make. You want to be in charge of the oppressive systems. You want to be the one. No, this is how communism always operates. You want to be the ones in charge of the oppressive systems. I sat here and listened to you say 250%. We talked about 250% inflation in Venezuela, massively lowered oil production from 3 million barrels a day to 800,000, and regimes, multiple communist regimes, both in Chavez and Maduro, that openly oppress and murder political dissidents. But somehow it's the United States' fault.
No. That's U.S. I say that's U.S. propaganda. I would say that
because you're a communist.
Venezuela
anything that goes against the agenda, you're going to fight against.
I'll say that what I mentioned about the inflation in Venezuela has to do with a global system that is controlled by the West, that has an interest in strangling the economy in a way where they wouldn't be able to be able to make sure that there was flourishing in their country, combined with the free trade agreements, right, that created and incentivized a race to the bottom with transnational corporations. That's my analysis of what happened there. You may have a different analysis. That's my analysis. On the point of the different, like me wanting to impose, what I am actually saying is that the people should be determining the nature of how their society is structured. I am offering an analysis, right, based on historical events, an analysis of what I think would be a better configuration of their society.
So as long as they have the correct critical consciousness, as long as they have the correct
that goes in
politics.
either direction. That goes in either direction. That's not unique to what I'm saying. You're going to say that it should be capitalist, U.S. dominated. And what I'm going to say is that I think that has been a force for bad in the world. Now, we can have a debate as to which of these systems has been a bigger force of and problems of detrimental genocide in the world. We can have that discussion. We can have that debate. But that's not me trying to impose it. It is a site of contestation of which vision of the world is better. And that's the nature of the conversation we have.
You said we come in, we destabilize, we use our industry, we use our thing. How's that any different than the Soviet Union training Pol Pot or Mao Zedong or any of the other communists that you going around spreading communism in places it doesn't exist, claiming it's better? I'm sorry, we're going around saying our ideas are better. You don't like them, so you say what we do is wrong, but we say what you do is wrong. The argument goes both ways. You're just trying to deny that your side engages in these things. Like, I'm trying to understand, are you saying that communist is innocent, that the USSR or communist China or communist North Korea don't commit horrific acts or committed horrific acts? Does Venezuela not kill its political people? Do these not, like, you can, I'm not sitting here and saying capitalist hands are clean. I'm saying that your arguments that you make to try and identify capitalism as bad, I can make every single bullet point back at you as communism. You know why? Because that's called nation building. It has nothing to do with what economic system runs your nation or what critical consciousness your people contain. If you want strong, powerful world domination, which is to Isaiah's point, your unwillingness to admit the truth that you just want your system in charge because you think it's better. But every point you make can be countered that your side is guilty of every same sin. Show me a sin that we do that you don't. 100 million people starved in the Holodomor thanks to communism. I don't know how many people die in China thanks to communism at this point.
40 to 80 million.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to point out, like, you're making these holier than thou arguments that just don't exist. This is what it is to be a nation builder. This is what it is to rule empires. And it's not like you're going to stop when you're just the king of your nation state with communism. I don't mean you personally, please. It's not an attack, but that's my point. Is very clear. It's not going to stop when you finish securing the inside of your borders. Then you're going to look externally, even based on the way you point out these things is already you're looking externally, the global interaction. So again, it's just a race to the top. And you're saying your nation building system is any better? It's committed every same sin. In fact, it's killed more and put more in poverty than my system. You can argue however you want about poverty in my system. More people live better in my system than ever lived in any socialist. They have no air conditioner in Europe, thanks to socialism.
One is that if we're going to have a serious conversation, right, then it's important to make really important distinctions. So the reason I started the way I started is to say that when I talk about socialism, and I specify that I'm talking about forms of socialism largely practiced in the third world, largely practiced in non-Western civilizations, because I have criticisms of the Soviet Union, right? So did Mao Zedong, right? So did many of the kind of African heads of states that emerged after the Cold War and African independence. Many of them had criticism of the USSR, right? And had their own conflicts with them, right? So I'm not going to defend the Soviet Union as a utopian form of governance, because there were certainly things that were happening there that were problematic that I would critique and condemn. The point that I want to make to you, particularly as you say, like the puppet regimes, right? Which again, there were some pushback to that. The difference is that the scale of which the United States and the West engaged in those puppet regimes, it dwarfs that of what the Soviet Union was able to do.
So,
right?
So my question would be to that is this, right? Because we talk about being a major economic power. We talk about how massive these things, and I think a level of capitalism has allowed America to operate in abundance, and that includes in the military force as well. What response do you expect to see from an industrialized nation like the U.S. When you see human rights like abuses happening in socialist countries? What do you expect? What do you expect a country like the U.S. to do, because if my understanding, a lot of these countries that practice socialism, and you see it across the globe, the people suffer the most, right? Because you're saying puppet regimes, you're saying this. What should the U.S. do operating out of a place of abundance in response to human rights abuses caused by socialism?
Well, here's the thing, is that the United States, the West engages in civil rights abuses and privatization of people's property. The United States incarcerates the largest percentage of its population of any country in the world, right? There are all kinds of human rights abuse, the NSA, right? In the way that, during the Obama administration, right, where the security apparatus gained more access to surveillance, right, as a result of policies that were pushed by this United States, the drone strikes. So we're talking about human rights, that goes across the board, right? And so the point I'm making isn't that those countries or those societies don't engage in those kinds of abuses. They happen on both sides of it. A part of what I am saying is that, so let's use a real example, Iran. In 1954, Iran elected Mohammad Mossadegh, who was a liberal Democrat. Some people call him a socialist, but he was really like a big state liberal. He became the president of Iran, and the West had anxieties about that because he was going to nationalize their oil reserves. So the United States installed the Shah, which was a brutal regime that resulted in the brutality over a couple of decades. That's why you get the 1979 hostages when the Ayatollah emerges. That's why they're taking American hostages, because the brutal regime that the United States installed was as a result of a geopolitical decision that the United States made using the cover of communism and socialism as a justification to overturn, to essentially oust Mossadegh out of office for the purpose of installing a brutal regime.
And so the Red-Green Alliance just never existed. That's just the Red-Green Alliance is the form of just a figment of people's imagination. Is that what it is?
I
don't understand how that's responsive to what I said. Why is that responsive to what I said?
I would argue that just taking your example of the events in Iran, but what have they traded that for? I mean, a society now in which women are stoned, gays are either hung from construction or thrown off of buildings. So I think philosophically, would you agree that from the standpoint of human nature, socialism is not a better system? We're not talking economics. We're just talking about the human animal and the depravity that it can sink into when it has absolute power.
I think this goes back to the point that I made about like the kinds of societies that we know about. I mean, ancient African civilizations had about 10,000 years of civilized society that did not have the level of war, and that didn't say they have any, right? Didn't say it was perfect. But the record of war and human devastation over the past 500 years, right? It overwhelms that you had during that 10,000 year period of relatively uninterrupted civilization in ancient Africa. So I don't think that in terms of human nature, I don't think based on a broader understanding of history, I actually think that it is commensurate with how human beings have been over the majority of
well, again, when you see relatively peaceful eras throughout history, even in the modern era, that coincides with a nation being flush with resources, because most of these conflicts are resource driven. Okay. There have been some that have been ideological. But when you say, and I will concede that with regard to, say, property rights here in America, we have had decisions like Kelo versus New London that have basically paved the way for saying, hey, you're not paying enough in property taxes, so we're going to usurp your property rights and give them to a commercial enterprise. It's going to bring in more taxes. So we do have that. The system is far from perfect. But again, I did not, for me, receive a satisfactory answer from you on why, on the ground, practically, we see flight in droves from nations that are practicing socialism. Haiti, for example. Haiti is a stone's throw away from Cuba. Yet Haitian immigrants risk a 100-mile shark-infested trip to Miami. Why not just go to the socialist paradise of Cuba? If the system is so much of a utopia, why are we seeing flight and avoidance of this practice?
And so part of what I'm saying is that the societies that I use as examples are not utopias. Part of what I'm saying is that a part of what makes them what they are is because there's a global economic order, the IMF, the WTO, right? The European Union, NATO, right? There are these international forces that agree with the Western capitalist form of governance. They politicize it and make it ideological. And they participate in structuring the global market in a way that puts them at a disadvantage, such that they cannot do business naturally with other allies. So if you're in the United States, you can go to Cuba, you can go on vacation, right? But in terms of like doing commercial business, right, that is embargoed.
So I'm still curious, though. I'm still curious on that fact, because I mean, this is kind of to the point, right? It's just the guys in agreement with Dayvon that advanced industrial countries, particularly U.S., interfere with these countries with regime change, and that's a big reason. So my question centers around, if these things, human rights abuse, and these things are going on in socialist countries where they're terrible to people, right? Shouldn't you have some moral standing and say, I'm not going to do business with you? And you're saying that's a form of economic strangulation. Yeah, we're going to not do business with you until you fix your country. Why is that not a good thing?
And what I would say, if that's the case, then people shouldn't do business with the United States.
So they don't. Let's be realistic. You keep making these things like we live. Like, I'm sorry, sir, you sound very naive to me that the world is this like fantastical place. But the reality is you do, because you seem to like disregard that. You want to say, well, none of these communist nations are utopias. So what's going to make your communist nation a utopia, right? What are you going to do different than these people do that's going to have any different end result? Because you keep disregarding every point we make. Well, you're right, but they're not good. But mine is better. That's the implied, when you make those statements, that's the implied reference, because otherwise we're not having a conversation. You're agreeing that communism is a terrible idea. Let's just start on that. Second of all, you disregard the fact that literally North Korea solely exists because China keeps the puppet regime in power. Let's just start with that reality today. Do you have any problem with that? Any problem whatsoever with that puppet regime and the way it kills people? Or then you referenced Iran in 1979, and you're claiming that the violence of the Shah in any way is comparable to what the Ayatollah and his insanity has brought upon the entirety of the world. That man has funded death across the globe, and he's not a powerful nation. So you're sitting here and saying that that it makes sense that these crazies came to power, and that's some sort of knock at the U.S. You keep trying to say that everything destabilized in the world is the U.S.'s fault. We shouldn't behave in our best interest. We shouldn't do what's best for our economy, for our people, for the people who trade with us, for the people who share ideals with us, people who share values with us. Like, what do you want that we should let your communist ideas run free when we think they're the killers of the world? And we keep showing you examples that you just brush off like, yeah, okay, this guy's bad, or there's no utopia here. Dude, own it. Own what your mentality has done to the world for the last century since it's been birthed. It has killed more people and kept more people in poverty, eating their cats and dogs, sir. And there'd be no oil fields in Venezuela without capitalism. He wouldn't have oil without us building it. None of those countries would have oil without us building it. We built it all, everywhere. That's why everybody wanted to take it back, because we were the only ones incentivized to do it.
Absolutely. But I do want to talk about what culture, like what kind of like the culture that each economic system creates. I want to go to this clip from Thomas Sowell.
What the welfare system and other kinds of governmental programs are doing is paying people to fail. Insofar as they fail, they receive the money. Insofar as they succeed, even to a moderate extent, the money is taken away. This is even extended into the school systems, where they will give money to schools with low scores. Insofar as the school improves its education, the money is taken away, so that you are subsidizing people to fail in their own private lives and become more dependent upon the handouts.
When you talk about socialism, there's centralized control where somebody makes a decision on who gets what, basically handouts from the government. What kind of culture does this create? Does it create an independent culture or a dependent culture? And what is the result of that? Dayvon, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Isaiah.
So your question assumes a bunch of things that one of the things that there are moments when conservatives agree with me is that what people of African descent lost was a sense of nationhood, is a sense of control over the institutions that govern our lives. That prior to the European colonization of the world, that you had flourishing societies, right? Again, not perfect, but flourishing societies where the level of kinds of abuses and genocide we see in our contemporary reality were not major forces in the world over that period of time. When you take away a people's sovereignty, when you take away a people's culture, then it creates a context where they're dependent on the colonizer for every aspect of our life. And so a part of when I talk about like capitalism and what it has done, it is generated, like chattel slavery was a product of capitalism, right? The genocide against the native peoples is a product of capitalism. So if we're talking about like systems that have done harm, right, to people around the world, capitalism is responsible for the miseries of billions of people around the world. Now you have other societies that have tried economic systems and they practice those systems in ways that have been harmful. Right. So no one is saying that there is a utopia in terms of modern practices of these economic systems. But more directly to your question and the clip you just played, what I would say differently than Thomas Sowell, what I would say is that when a people who were used to fulfilling their own needs was ripped away from their society, and then chattel slavery, which wasn't just about subjugation, but literally about erasing the cultural memory of a people to reduce them to the Negro, as opposed to the range of different societies and communities that we emerged from on the continent, then yeah, you're going to produce a context where folks are dependent on a system. And one of the things that for me is a part of the analysis that I offer is that what is revolutionary is people of African descent organizing ourselves on the basis of strength, building institutions that are independent and engaging this larger system, because politics is a contestation for power and resources. And so as a people, we need to organize ourselves in such a way where we're competing for those resources in a society that dehumanizes us, doesn't recognize our humanity, and exploits us, and that our collective disorganization benefits larger white society and larger capitalists.
How does that?
It sounds like you're trying to make a fancy argument for capitalism. Before I get Isaiah to respond, I want to bring up this because this was from a gentleman named George Fitzhugh, who wrote The Honest Socialist. And when I bring up this in terms of dependency, because he wrote this: one of the wildest sects of communism in France proposes not only to hold all property in common, but to divide the profits not according to each man's input and labor, but according to each man's wants. Now, this is precisely the system of domestic slavery with us. You're talking about in America. We provide for each slave in old age and in infancy, in sickness and in health, not according to his labor, but according to his wants. A southern farm in the Beau is the Beau ideal of communism. And this is from, again, the honest communist, the honest socialist, George Fitzhugh. Isaiah, I want to get your response here, man, because, to me, it sounds like Dayvon is really arguing. He doesn't like that capitalism came up with, was I guess, started by white people or I don't know. But it just sounds like he's arguing for a system of individual property, individual right, but it cannot be capitalism.
No, what Dayvon is doing is he is using the wizard circle. He is trying to he's confusing the terms intentionally to fool people into coming into a critical consciousness. That's the thing that's bothering me the most here. You cannot have, when you say it's so crazy that you pulled that quote up. Because essentially, yes, the plantation is how every socialist society has run. Every country that's had socialism, that's how they run their country. The state takes all of the property, seizes all the means of production, which is exactly what that's socialism 101. Seize the means of production. And the positive transcendence of private property as human self-estrangement. Again, the point of this entire thing is that out of a sense of social vengeance that's repackaged as social justice, you're saying that you guys should have all the power and should be in charge of these systems so that you get to make the decisions and that you get to decide who lives, who dies, who makes, who makes money and who doesn't. And I'm sorry, bro, that's not what this is about, especially when dealing with a system. We're talking about a system, a cult. Socialism is not an economic practice. Socialism is a religion. Okay. We're talking about a religion that goes against human nature, by the way, because human nature always goes towards the individual. The individual is the most oppressed minority on planet Earth. Let's make that perfectly clear. You are advocating, Dayvon, for a system that in China has taken 65 million lives. Soviet Union, over 30 million. Cambodia, 2 million. North Korea, 2 million. The whole continent of Africa, 1.7 million. Afghanistan, 1.5 million. Like we are dealing with a political system that you're advocating for that has taken nearly 200 million lives in the past century. What's driving me especially crazy is the fact that your argument just seems to go back to, oh, well, they didn't do this right. Oh, they didn't do that right. That's the same thing every single socialist has come up with. That is the sole excuse that every single socialist comes up with when they say, oh, well, our state failed. When people point out the failures of socialism to govern to essentially govern human nature by force, socialism is slavery. It is slavery to the state. It is worship of the state, a total state as God. And I'm sorry, like there's nothing in your worldview that is compatible with our Constitution, that's compatible with human nature, that's compatible with anything.
So a couple things. One, and to your quote that you had on there, in, again, some indigenous and ancient African societies, a part of how it worked is that if you don't participate and do a job that benefits the community, you don't get the benefits of the community. You don't get to participate. Some of the ways that they punished people, actually, who violated the community, many of them didn't use prisons. But what many of them did is you would get exiled, right? You would get exiled from the community and you don't get to participate. You don't get the benefits.
So you become a free man, is what you're saying.
No, you don't get, because in a society, if you want to participate in like the things that the community does, that's inherently a social endeavor, right? If you're talking about like,
so hold on a second. So kind of like what they're doing in China with the social credits.
You gotta let me, I'm going to get to the China example. So point that I'm making is that there's a caricature, right, of like what socialism is. And again, there are examples, right, that you can point to that are not the ideal versions of it. And that's why I started my commentary on saying that many of the indigenous and ancient African societies were the best in terms of what it looks like when they are functional, right? Because we operate.
So real communism hasn't been tried. So real socialism hasn't been tried. Come on, man. Come up with something different. Do something different. This is the same thing that I hear on X every day. This is the same nonsense that's been pumped into Western, into all of these colleges and universities. No, you need to do something different, man.
So the point that I'm making is that in modern society, right, the project of European domination of the world and all of its forms of oppression has created a dynamic where when folks have tried to institute systems that are more aligned with human flourishing, right, that they have been dominated. But there have been examples within that.
Let me ask the question. Let's just try to reset here for a second. Dayvon, you mentioned something a little while back where you were describing the construction of systems. And I don't want to misquote you, but you were describing the structure of a system that you believed could be implemented where Blacks basically put together systems, to your word, engage with the dominant systems. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I can go with
fairly. Okay. I just wanted to ask, when you say engage, can you expound on that? Because what it sounds like to me is that you're suggesting the hybrid form of capitalism. So
here's what, I'm going to address quickly something that was said before and then address that. The China example and forms of communism. Part of what I think is important for me to reiterate is that just like, the gentleman mentioned this thing of like, oh, it hasn't been practiced yet. One of the things that, brother, you said, and I appreciate you saying it because it's an honest kind of explanation of the current system that we're in, is that there are people who will talk about advocating capitalism, but a variety of different ways of practicing it. Big state capitalism, right? Republican, forms of capitalism, authoritarian capitalism. So there are a variety of different iterations of these systems. And part of if we take seriously the study of human endeavor, human organization, the purpose is to understand how those societies were structured and then figure out what is the best versions that we can use to construct the society that we live in. So then directly to your question, when I talk about like the importance of people of African descent building economic, political institutions such that we can engage the society from a position of strength and power, I am clear that we currently do live in a capitalist society. And I am clear that it's important for us to build the kinds of institutions that can ensure our independence and sovereignty, but not to emulate what the American and Western mainstream has done. Meaning that when you talk about things like healthcare, let's use healthcare as an example, right? That the profit motive in health and wellness creates an inferior product, right? It creates sick care systems, right? It creates incentives for people to push forms of, medicine and prescriptions.
What we have seen, and I think this term often gets conflated with capitalism, is corporatism or crony capitalism, right? When now you have a government that's in bed with industry and then determining policy and rates in the market. And that's in your example of healthcare. And I think that's why we do see people trying to lean socialist or leaning other, in different direction, because what's been labeled as capitalism, which isn't really capitalism, it's cronyism, or you can even call it corporate welfare or corporate socialism. That system has produced terrible results. It has increased prices for healthcare, but it's not capitalism. That's not capitalism.
One of the main reasons to illustrate that is, Dayvon, you go into a 7-Eleven, everything's got a price tag on it, right? Anywhere you go, any product you buy, it's got a price tag on it, except in the healthcare industry. It's not until you consume that product that you find out how much it costs. Okay. So that is a bastardization of capitalism. Further, the fact that healthcare insurers do not, by and large, compete across state lines. That's a form of protectionism, a monopolistic or duopolistic practice that we see that contributes to exactly what you said. I will concede your point. The American healthcare system lends itself more so to treatment as opposed to actual cures and resolving problems. A doctor will have you on some medication for the rest of your life because there's a cost to that. If I come out tomorrow with a cure to cancer, that's a one-shot deal, So I think that there is room for agreement on both sides, but I would suggest that when people argue in favor of socialist policies, if that ideology is going to stand on its own, you guys can't continue to blame every failure. Like right here, I'm telling you right now, yes, you're right. The healthcare industry is a bastardization of capitalism, and it hurts people the way it's practiced in this country. I have no problem with admitting that. But by the same token, if you guys are going to be honest, then everywhere we've seen socialism practice, it has not been able to compete with capitalism. And you can frame that by saying, well, it's because of the Machiavellian schemes that the West has put together. Whatever the case may be, it has failed every time it's tried up against the competing system.
You all got. You're sitting here trying to have a debate. Like I've been sitting here and it dawned on me finally, but I'm not getting got anymore. Isaiah, you got to stop getting mad because I'm going to point something out right now and you should all be made aware. So I respect you for coming on here, Mr. Love. I appreciate you bringing your point of view to our panel, but do you believe that when you have critical debate, you have to have certain logical basis that that are metrics for that debate that are standardized so you can measure points against points? So would you say using an abstract way to present it, comparing apples to oranges would be an inaccurate way to do that? Like it would be let's just say intellectually dishonest to make an argument by comparing apples to oranges?
Generally, sure.
Okay, so I want to point out a comment. You were intellectually dishonest when you tried to compare how much destruction the world has seen in the last 100, 150 years, 200 years, even 500 years, even compared to the time period of the African nations you were comparing it to. Why is that intellectually dishonest? Because in the time period you're comparing it to, one push of a button was invented to destroy millions of lives. Has nothing to do with capitalism, had everything to do with nation building. We were doing this before capitalism versus socialism was a motivator in the world. We were inventing ways to kill ourselves from the very beginning. And to that point, the next dishonest intellectual point you make of comparing apples to oranges is you continuously reference civilizations that there are best theories about how they function, because there isn't enough in any real formidable way to come to consensus conclusion amongst the scholars and saying that their demonstrations of whatever they did are better than, or some mechanism that proves your point. Sir, they do not exist anymore. They are gone. They are wiped away from the face of the planet. If they were these superpowers that were able to motivate and do all these things, then they would be here. See, no one is arguing that the system that we're presenting is perfect or works in a way that's fantastical, like you are. You are prescribing that somehow if you do something that we have seen fail over and over and over again, it won't fail. Capitalism is generally successful. We live better. We have more. We have so much that you can sit on the capitalist created phone and argue with us intellectually instead of going to find your dinner. That's a key element of capitalism, is that more poor people live better, that the bottom of society has more than it ever had before. My wife is a survivor of communism, the horror stories of what it is to live in those nations. Okay. And you want to disregard that. These are intellectual fallacies that you are presenting by trying to compare apples and oranges all night to us. When we present you the apples to apples argument, you swipe it aside saying, well, I'll do it better. Yes, he is right. Isaiah is right. You have presented it very eloquently.
I would like to respond on those points.
I'm landing right here, sir. But in the end, you are just saying that when you do it, you won't fail like these places before you fail. You present no method in how yours is any different than their mentality going in.
So a few things. The first is that I can give you the text of many scholars. I talked about Sheikh Anta Diop, John G. Jackson. I can give you Willis Huggins. I can, these are scholars who the claims they make to other historians, regardless of race or perspective, are that are unrefuted. Right, because many of the claims that I'm making about ancient civilization, 2,000 years before Europeans were smelting steel, right? In modern day Tanzania, there is evidence of semiconductor technology smelting steel at higher temperatures before Europeans were doing it, right? That is not a thing that's speculation. You can read the archaeological evidence of these different things. Now, you cannot believe it, and that's fine. That's okay.
Graham Hancock also says that there's super race that lived on the planet. Do you assign to his assessment? I'm sorry, like you're quoting pseudoscience at me. This is not generally accepted scholarly. You are making YouTube channels be scholarly input. Sir, get me a university paper that backs you. Find me someone that has credibility that isn't saying because I said so.
All right, I mean,
if there was something, the whole world would be looking for that technology full force to get rich off of it.
Well, let me ask Dayvon this.
Basically, the Wakanda argument. That's what he's making.
Let me ask Dayvon this. Who built the pyramids? Was it aliens or someone else?
The ancient Egyptians.
Okay, so have we been able to?
And those technologies haven't been able to be replicated by modern engineering because of the engineering expertise. And many of the pyramid structures you see in Egypt, you see them in the kind of the places where the Mayans and Aztecs were, because there was collaboration and cultural exchange between the ancient Egyptians and Africans.
That's the only way you can build up without modern technology. Dude, science has explained this for over 100 years. Like, this is uncontested fact. They have proven it. That is geometric shape you can build in without modern technology. There is no proof of that. You're trying to quote like
that's not true. That just isn't true. I am quoting
found a picture that looks like a boat. That's not science, sir. That's not history.
Right, it is.
I've heard
let's bring it back. I want to ask Dave on this.
Scholar says that pseudoscience. Semiconductors in any meaningful fashion that scientists are now forced to examine it. They haven't presented any evidence that has moved the needle to make capitalism want to invest in it. If this was real, people would be going for that technology. They would be looking for the way to make prehistoric semiconductors so that NVIDIA doesn't own the market.
The problem is that for many people, their lack of knowledge about these societies, and many of the scholars that I'm referring to, many of them are white. So many of them are white scholars who had no incentive on making these arguments, right, back in the 19th century. And so many of them making many of these discoveries, the reason that people aren't going for it is similar to the way that you comported yourself when I've raised these points, which is that you've internalized a historical narrative about civilization where Africans could not possibly have developed these advanced technologies.
No, I don't think anybody's saying that. No one's trying to diminish Africa.
What I am saying is pseudoscience when I'm quoting scholars who are of the highest rank. Mario
advanced civilizations on the continent of Africa thousands of years before there were any advancements anywhere on Earth. That's his claim. I know what he's talking about. He's also claiming that when he says Egyptians, he means a black Pan-African people, not an Arabic people like Egypt claims they are, even before the Arab conquest. Right?
The Egyptians came from the south.
You are. When you say Egypt, you're not saying black people. You're not trying to take
No,
back.
I am saying that.
This has, dude, you talk about blacks sailing the ocean everywhere. It's based on a picture they claim is from the time of Mansa Musa that they said is like, dude, I know these arguments. I hear them daily. I hear them from all the
Have you read Ivan Van Sertima? They came before Columbus.
Up on CT's panel, man, and they all present this evidence over and over. And a basic search with anything disproves all of it over and over. Where are these massive civilizations today? You know what? Rome built roads. You know, we can't replicate that technology.
So let me ask Dayvon, why did these civilizations fail, and why? Because this is kind of like the point, right? If socialism produces consistent results, strong enough to survive, why does it always die? And if your argument is capitalism or capitalist nations, I don't know, take over. Like I'm not understanding why these things die off if they're so good. If these things are so successful, if this system works to the T, and not because they didn't do it right, not because anything else, why isn't it the system that is dominating now? Why isn't it the system that's producing or elevating more people out of poverty? Why isn't it the system that creates more independence and the things that you talk about, self-sufficiency, self-reliance, economic independence, which I'm a big believer of? Why is it not the system that's dominating the world, the globe, because of its merits, not by force?
There have been 10,000 years of human history. The last 500 years, if you compare it to 10,000 years, is a blip. It is a blip in human history. The overwhelming majority of human history has had systems that would be described as socialist societies, right? Now, some that were not, right? But you had socialist societies that existed for thousands of years. That the past 500 years was unique in world history because of the project of European domination of the world. They saw themselves as the arbiters of what God was, of what reason was, of what civilization was. And so in the 19th century, right, when many of the historians that became the authority that many of us use in the formal education we receive, curated a historical record that made it so that many people wouldn't know many of these societies. Most people don't know that we get Memphis from the fact that it was the first urban city in world history. Most people don't know that, but the historical record of that is clear. And the people that I mentioned the story of Sheikh Anta Diop when he went and debated the other Egyptologists who were white Egyptologists. He was the only one that actually had a scientific background in refuting their claims about the origins of the ancient Egyptians, coming from the southern part of the Nile Valley, the Nubians who were black people. If there is a lack of understanding of things that for most historians are basic facts, they're basic facts among people who actually read the evidence. That if you know that Hippocrates talked about Imhotep, right, the first medical doctor in world history, in the Hippocratic Oath, he mentions, and he refers to him as a Greek name, but he mentions Imhotep and African. Pythagoras talks about how he studied in ancient Egypt. The so-called father of history, Herodotus, talked about.
So I'm asking, why haven't we seen socialist? Why haven't we seen socialist nations thrive?
I am saying that for the majority of world history, they have.
This is something I honestly try to understand. What socialist nation will you move to today?
Okay, so here's the thing. All of as I mentioned before, the economic strangulation of Western imperialism creates a pull effect where they make it so that people don't do business with them. They make them pariahs globally. So it creates a context where they're at a competitive disadvantage when the country with the biggest military in the history of the world, that is a global economic superpower, that controls NATO, that controls IMF, that controls World Trade Organization, right? That
in other words, none.
You know what I mean?
Like, in other words, none.
But
none.
The point that I am making,
come on and say it, man. Just none. You haven't answered this question, and you didn't answer the last one. Which socialist nation that exists right now would you live in? Why is it hard for you to answer, sir?
It's not, you don't like the answer. The answer is that there's a global economic order that makes it so that these countries, when they embark,
that's not an answer.
That's an answer, but you don't have to like it. And it's fine. You don't have to like it.
I got you on that. His answer is he has to turn America socialist so that power is no longer impacting other.
Exactly.
Oh no, that's good. No, I'm down for revolution. The American
you think you're going to be in charge of it.
That's also what he would do different is he would topple the biggest capitalist engine in the world in order to make sure, and that's how socialism will thrive.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. You want to
dude, I finally figured it out, dude, because I realized he was comparing apples to oranges. And as soon as I got that in my head, now I understand exactly what he's saying. I'm gonna point something out to you, dude. You're comparing feudalism to socialism. You're comparing pure tyrannical dictators to socialism because the government controls everything. That's your mechanism of comparative. But it's not socialism, because you said all these ancient civilizations were actually socialists. So they were actually—
I didn't say all of them.
I mean like a large amount of them, but they actually had kings and queens. A lot of these places had emperors and rulers, and it wasn't about—
But the structure of their government, was not the traditional monarch system that we learn of about.
But it wasn't about for the people. See, socialism is about lifting up the bottom so that that's the conceptual, is that by giving everyone by their needs, you'll have no one poor and everyone will be the same and everybody will be content because there'll be no differentiation. You'll be homogenous.
People's basic needs are met.
Right.
Society
There are tons of societies in history that you're talking about that were tyrannical, but they functioned economically similar to socialism, where the government provided everything. But it wasn't because it was trying to raise— again, I'll respectfully disagree that accepted history disagrees with you, and you can continue to make the point that everything everybody knows is a lie and what you know and your people know is the only truth.
Just check the scholarship.
Our knowledge, and you and yours are the keeper of the truth. But since I will go with historical precedent, because no evidence, and I've heard all these arguments before many a times, and all these guys will attest to the amount of people I've heard talk like you do to me in this format, and I respect everything you say. No disrespect. I understand that's what you believe. We have a fundamental disagreement on how the world needs to run. But I am telling you, those places traditionally are tyrannical. They are vicious. They oppress their people that they provided for. That's why they provided for them, so that they couldn't go anywhere. Modern example is North Korea. It looks very socialist, but really it's just a tyrannical dictator. It just behaves communist because that's the easiest way for a tyrant to control everybody all at once. It works out really well that an evil person can use socialism to oppress everyone.
The thing that bothers me the most is that, again, this is the same— like you didn't answer any of the questions. When someone asked you directly which socialist nation would you move to, you went into this diatribe about you gave excuses. Okay, you kept giving excuses. You didn't answer the question direct. So I still want to know, I'm still waiting for that. What socialist nation that exists right now would you, Dayvon Love, move to right now? If America is such a bad country, if the United States and Western civilization is the cause of everybody's problems, right? Of all the all the problems and oppressions that exist today, what socialist country would you move to?
So it seems like your friend, the gentleman Gimpy, understood me when he said that he was clear that the presence of the United States and its global order is the problem. I argue that in order to have socialism that is effective and impactful, then yes, the American social order has to cease to exist.
He's very forthright. As soon as I stopped trying to meet him apples to apples and started looking at it as apples to oranges, you'll realize what he is saying. The thing he wants to do different is not go start and turn another country socialist and make it a power to compete with the United States. What I want to do different, that's what they're all saying, is basically what he's saying. Is the different thing is they're going to topple us, and he thinks the global economy churns on and that they can recoup and everything works out hunky-dory. There's a communism ending, and I mean communism in the sense of utopia. I don't really believe.
So let me ask this:
it's no different, but that's no different than every other socialist. Is like if we just get rid of America, we just get rid of Western civilization.
That's his honest answer. That's
so that is an honest.
Here's the thing, but honestly, no, that makes you my enemy, sir.
Cool.
That makes you my enemy.
That's cool.
Because you would rather enslave Western civilization the second you get power.
I would like Dayvon to finish.
And so what I am saying is that when you look at the larger social order and you compare it to the societies before it, and I want to reiterate, because, Mr. Gimpy, you mentioned something about saying that all these societies were utopian, and I am not saying that. I am not saying that all of these ancient civilizations were perfect or utopian. I am saying that those societies have a better record in terms of human brutality and degradation than the society over the past 500 years. And what I'm saying is that we should learn from the best of those non-Western societies that many of us know nothing about, because the literature, and I have to take exception to the fact that I can name historians who have expertise in archaeology and chemistry and biology, right? Who actually have scientific credentials that form the basis of their analysis of ancient civilizations. Now, we can disagree about that, and if we're going to debate about that, let's just have a session. We bring our texts. Let's just bring the books and compare.
Why does socialism worship low culture?
Whoa, let him finish. Let him finish.
Why does socialism worship low culture, sir?
I don't what are you talking about? That isn't
what I'm saying. You have not. You keep saying that if we look back in history, if we look back in through all these historical texts and everything that you keep talking about, that somewhere in there we'll find something that works somehow better than the United States Constitution, something that works better. But again, if it worked better, it'd still be around today. You have failed to answer that.
Except that the project of European domination and colonialism destroyed those societies. It's not a coincidence that when Alexander the Great goes to Egypt and burns a bunch of the texts that in Mali and Sankore,
Persia, before Persia, Mesopotamia, and before Mesopotamia, Babylon. I'm just curious, sir. All of human history is with cultures dominating and conquering other cultures. You're blaming the whites that they invented it.
I think that's an overgeneralization.
Persia tried to make itself. Persia marched into Europe, my friend. Every world leader who has had a set of testicles has wanted it all. You're playing this game like white people invented conquering. We just called it our God, and I don't even mean we, but I just, because you said something about books and experts and everything, and I'm not knocking you, but all these people who claim to be experts, we sat for 3 years listening to them advise us lies about medical, that pretty much the whole world agrees that these people told us whatever they were paid to tell us, no matter what their expertise was or whatever it was, whatever got them clicks, likes, in front of
Who are you talking about?
Medical professionals during the period of 2018 through 2022. You have to be careful what you say on YouTube. Right? Many people who were certified, degreed in positions of power and leadership lied for profit. People who were influencers, who were thought leaders, who were community organizers lied for gain. Governments, nations oppressed their people, forced medical intervention without consent on their people, right? And all these people were experts, correct? And certified and the best in their field. Again, saying that just because they're certified and they're best in their field does not make their work truth.
I agree with that.
Your guys are untrue. I'm just saying currently they are laughed at by most of their communities. The
people that I'm talking about are not the people you're talking about.
I know the guys that you're talking. I've heard these. The guy you're talking about specifically, he did not prove they were melanin. He just proved the one scientist that is also an Egyptologist.
Have you read the notes of the UNESCO conference when he debated the Egyptologists?
I didn't. Unfortunately, I had it presented to me live on stream in ad nauseum by a bunch of proclaimed Pan-Africans on stream. So I've heard it all repetitiously. And I'm telling you, dude, the general consensus when they heard what he says, it didn't disprove anything. It throws into question that maybe we don't know how to actually genetically test things properly from ancient times. The same way we now ask if carbon dating is as accurate as we think it is. But there is no consensus that this small band of Egyptologists is right. On top of the fact you talked about them being more civilized, they practiced in your own Egyptologists, practiced in human sacrifice, these civilizations. They murdered people for ritualistic religious beliefs. They slaughtered whole nations based on their gods. These people, but they didn't have the ability to press a button and wipe out 40,000 people. So again, this is why it's an apples to oranges thing, because they didn't have the technology to be destructive, like the European technological advancement motivated by their conquering and colonizing, which was not their invention. Rome thought they invented it before them. The Persians thought they invented it. The Greeks thought, the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians. Hell, my people tried to conquer a bunch of the world under Solomon.
And that's why I asked the question of why socialism, or why does socialism worship low culture? It's like you're asking people again to seek things that didn't work, that would not work, and it's like, but yet you want us to just try it. You have this exasperation, like if only we would just listen and try to do something old and outdated. It's like, but yet you call Western civilization old and outdated. I don't get you people.
No, it's not old and outdated. So here's what I'm saying. A couple of things. One, if we want to have a discussion about the historical record, we can set up a time where we just compare scholars' footnotes, the evidence that backs what they say. That's something that can't be resolved right now. I'm gonna quote scholars that are credible and whose evidence is back, whatever. But on the point about the kinds of destruction that societies in this civilization are capable of, the question we should ask ourselves is, what does it say about a culture that has perfected the ability of engaging in human devastation? That is a question about the cultural ethos of modern civilization that we should have some questions and some concerns about. To the point that was made about like low culture and going back, history is not linear, right? There are times when there's people make progress. There are certain societies that might be more advanced in one area than another. And what I am saying is that we should rigorously study these societies, take the best from them. So the gentleman mentioned something about like human sacrifices. Yeah, there were some societies that did that, but there were many ancient societies that did not do that. Yes, there were some societies that had centralized power and monarchies in the way that we have been socialized to learn about them in Europe. But there were also examples of configurations of societies that had kings where the kings didn't have absolute power. And so we should study rigorously these different ways that societies have been organized and have a real discussion about then what is the vision for how we organize our society. And what I argue is that over the past 500 years, the enterprise of European domination of the world has been responsible for many of the major atrocities in world history. And it has created a context where America is a global superpower because of the genocide of the indigenous people.
Let me respond to this, Dayvon, because I do feel like you're advocating for the U.S. Constitution. Like it is a system that he's evaluated systems of across the world that has noticed the positives, the negatives of each. When you talked about just now a king or a king with limited power, I mean, that is how our three branches of government are set up. We don't have a king. We fought to get away from the king. And then you talk about individual rights, self-determination. All of these things are within the Constitution. Like the whole idea of capitalism is you can't have slavery and capitalism, right? Because they don't coincide, because capitalism recognizes an individual's rights. You can't have that. If you're operating in a capitalist system, you cannot have a system where you're denying a person of their right, because it doesn't work. Also, capitalism needs people, right? Because you develop a solution, develop a product, you need people to sell it to, market it to. Socialism, in essence, right? You're trying to reduce the amount of mouths you need to feed because there's not enough to go around in essence, right? So I feel like you are advocating for a capitalist system, but you just don't want to say it's the American capitalist republic system that we have set up.
I think that there's a caricature of socialist political economies that is not based on actual study of societies that function outside of the West, but based on caricatures and the most popular examples that people give are the examples of the Soviet Union, right? Like that's the example that.
So when you say caricatures of socialism is what you're saying?
Right, caricatures of because what you're saying that it sounds like I'm advocating for things that you consider to be capitalistic, and you mentioned the U.S. Constitution. What I'm saying is that there are forms of organizations of society that ensure that people have their basic needs met, that have systems of governance where there's not absolute power, right? There are examples of societies, both modern and ancient, right, that were organized in ways that we should learn from. And I'm saying the modern system of capitalism as it exists today was buttressed by chattel slavery, the genocide of indigenous people, the colonization of the continent of Africa and places around the world, and that provides the economic engine that makes the United States a global superpower.
Anything that eliminates the individual and that asks for the positive transcendence of private property as human self-estrangement is something that is diametrically incompatible. It is incompatible with Western society. We are not animals, nor should we be herded like animals by those who think they're better than us and want to group us as serfs. And
I didn't say
that. And that's the argument that what's that?
I didn't say that what I'm interested in is everybody having the same. I have said over and over again that there are a range of different configurations of societies.
So why do they all end up? So why do they all end up at the same place when we're talking about socialism? They're all the same. They all end up going to the same place.
So America did try socialism at one point, and it's interesting because it is just, the reason for the Thanksgiving holiday.
America tried socialism.
America tried, well, the Pilgrims, the settlers tried socialism, and that's the first system they tried when they first got here, and it led to many of them starving. And I think over half of the pilgrims died because what they did was they said, we all worked the land together, we all put it into the centralized pot, and what it led to was, you know, people were unincentivized or disincentivized to work. It led to starvation, all that stuff. As soon as people were given the right to work their land and keep the fruits of their labor, that's when we represented abundance, right? Because again, in a capitalist system or free market system, you still need other people. I can have a whole bunch of corn, but I need tomatoes. Let me go trade. The first Thanksgiving was a celebration of a different free market system of abundance.
The so-called settlers were not used to the climate. They were eating each other in early American history because they weren't used to the climate. They weren't used to the agricultural things that it took to have a successful harvest here in the United States. That's why they were struggling. And it was the native people who actually had the agricultural expertise, which is why they were able to survive.
What Dayvon is saying is he wants people to focus on the end result of what happened of the starvation that took place, instead of the mechanisms by which that occurred. The pilgrims tried a collectivist system and it failed
badly.
It failed badly. And you're saying, well, there was cannibalism and people were starving. Yeah, well, how the hell did they get there?
We're all working like kibbutz, and that's why
they didn't know how to manage the land.
Dude, they came from a worse.
They didn't know.
This is what I'm saying. You are telling, your basis of your argument is that I know the people who know the truth. And despite the fact that you think you know the truth, no, me and these people know the truth. Everything you know and has been taught isn't true because white people have been doing this to oppress you. Let me point out something. Since the foundation of this country, rights have been becoming progressively better. This is the only nation on earth where people have technically become freer as time has gone on. Okay, there are no standing nations that have the progress we do. We have progressive nations, but no one has inalienable rights like we do. This is the only country on earth that you are actually guaranteed your voice, your self-defense, your right to the property. And somehow all the things we do wrong, I agree with you. I'll give you that. We do wrong. Sure. No nation got it right, but we're still standing and we're still evolving in the direction of progress. But your argument is destroy all that because some nation that was literally murdering everybody so that they can stay in power and keep this failing system in place is more important.
I think the reading mainstream historiography would read the early settlers as practicing socialism and reading that as a rationale for why it doesn't work. Given
that's not mainstream reading of history, though.
It is, but
it's not.
We'll disagree on that. But the larger point that I want to make is that what I am offering, and I think a big part of this conversation, we've talked a lot about history. What I am offering is a vision of the world that is informed by a rigorous engagement of other societies and rigorously engaging how their systems were organized as a way to analyze the existing one.
I do feel like we've done that with the founding of this country, though.
We've done, who's done what with the founding of the country?
The founding fathers analyzed the civilizations that existed before us, figured out what worked and what didn't, what ended in destruction, what didn't. They knew the different languages. They had rationale of different, contexts from different countries, different languages, different cultures, different societies, seeing them rise and fall. And we created what's known as the U.S. Constitution to address all of those things. And even in creating this document, right, it recognizes that it's not perfect, right? Because as humans, we are imperfect beings. But even in that, it says we're striving for a more perfect union, right? So it's not saying we need to destroy this and tear it down or build another society, because every civilization that you've referenced, the founding fathers talked about them too.
So here's the thing, and you are right that many of them did study other societies. I actually mentioned that at the top, where a big part of how they came up with the Constitution was mimicking some of what the Iroquois was doing in the Northeast region, what we call the United States. So many of them did study those. Here is the difference between what you're saying and what I'm saying. The difference is that they structured the owner class settlers organized a polity that would benefit them and their peers. They structured the system in a way that would benefit them and their peers, and that the rights of those that weren't them were rights that had to be amended onto the Constitution, because the Constitution itself did not contemplate. The Constitution is a pro-slavery document because the 3/5 compromise, not that the 3/5 in saying enslaved people were 3/5 of human being makes it pro-slavery, but that the 3/5 was a compromise with the slave-owning South in order to ensure that the South had equitable political power in the United States government, makes it a pro-slavery document. And that was a part of how they wrote it. It wasn't.
I think Frederick Douglass would vehemently disagree with that.
You're talking about over 150 years ago, we corrected people being slaves in this country. And then, was it 70 years ago?
I didn't get a chance to. Finish.
Almost 60 years ago,
course.
we corrected people not having balanced rights in this country. Again, you have to reach back to a time that no longer exists to justify your destruction of the United States today. You keep making points about its history that have directly been accounted because many Americans agreed with you from the very inception of this country, from women getting rights, suffragette, to civil rights for blacks in the 60s, to gay marriage now. Whether I agree with all those decisions or not, or everyone agrees with them, this country has made it its interest based on what logic had said, is that the founding fathers knew they'd make mistakes, knew that political compromise would have to occur, and that later generations would have to learn the lessons. The only living, breathing document that exists in a manner like this is the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution empowers every citizen to become the landowner.
Every individual.
There are no obstacles. There's no redlining. There's no Jim Crow. You're old enough to maybe remember that, like, people talked about protesting in the 70s, as you referenced earlier about your education from people who were activists and revolutionaries during the 70s in Pan-Africanism. We are in 2025, about to be 2026. In America today, we are all shit out of luck the exact same way. All of us. We all are struggling to make ends meet, and we are all in the same boat. These historic wrongs that exist, they exist for multiple demographics and across multiple social issues. We could talk about the Irish, the Chinese in this country. And yes, the blacks had it the worst because they were slaves. No one is arguing that. But we are in 2026, and you're saying the country that has done everything in its power to lead by its people and correct its things is the worst country on earth because it doesn't like socialism.
So, no, that's not what I'm saying. That last part's not what I'm saying. A country that commits genocide and enslavement does not get credit for stopping doing it, especially when what the country did was accumulate wealth and resources and power that was the basis of that genocide and that enslavement.
So vengeance.
So name a country. Hold on.
I'm gonna blow that up every single time because that's all it is.
Hold on, but Dayvon,
you never went through.
Dayvon, I want you to finish your point.
Directly affect you, Dayvon. How does slavery?
One mic, please, gentlemen. One mic, please.
Dayvon, I want you to finish your point, but I do want to ask: what country has not experienced this? What country has not had slavery or been, had these particular ills that you talk about? You're saying that America was founded upon this wrong. Like, I guess you're a supporter of 1619 Project and what that preaches. But there's an original sin. What nation or what country does not have a terrible past that you'd be willing to say this is a shining example of what socialism or whatever could be?
The point that I am making as it relates to enslavement and genocide in the United States is that there have been forms of indentured servitude, slavery, people being taken prisoners of war. American chattel slavery was not just about the denigration of African people. It was literally an attempt to wipe African people off the face of the earth historically and culturally. That is how you get the Negro. You take all these other cultures. People weren't able to practice their language, able to practice our cosmology, right? Forced to forget, to disparage, to see Africa as inferior. And the kind of brutality, right? The nature of the kind of brutality, right? Whether it's women having their wombs cut open, right? Like, all of these things are examples of the kind of brutality that is unique to the United States. And so that formed the basis. And the reason why it's important, the question of, well, other countries have done it, because it is American and chattel slavery and genocide of the indigenous people that formed the basis of the economic inertia that made America a global superpower. So that's why it is relevant today. That is why our society is structured in the way it is today. And let me just say this last thing. so I can finish my point, which is that what I argue is that a people is responsible for ensuring its future. It is responsible for organizing itself on the basis of being able to make a future for itself and its people. And what I am saying is that what justice looks like, I saw the gentleman talk about like social vengeance. What I am saying is that America is a blight on the world. And what I am saying is that what I want for people of African descent is for us to be organized so sufficiently that we can navigate the society from a position of strength and power. We're not reliant on a regime that denigrates the humanity of our people globally and keeps afloat this global system that exploits people of African descent and working class people all across the globe. That is what I am advocating for. And that is distinct from the United States in the way that it articulates its vision.
So I want to say this, man, because we really got to get out of here. This is from my friend Klassen Bernard. He's an author. He wrote a book called Outcast. He's also a two-time Olympian down in Louisiana, I think he is. He said the recognition of individual rights is the key to capitalism. It recognizes an objective good and a moral lawgiver as the standard of all rights. It forces men to strive for this on an individual basis. Only the individual can decide what is valuable to him. Man must be free to discover this value and make choices about his family and livelihood. The free market system is the only place where this is possible, where we can have an objective value to something. So that's Klassen Bernard. And I think what you're saying here, Dayvon, you're saying blacks need economic freedom. And the only way to really get there is through capitalism. It's through being able to own property, being able to own businesses, employing your community. And if you want to create this global independent system, the best way to get there is through work. It's to build your own economic independence. I'm not seeing, at least where
real quick
socialism
because
will help achieve that.
You mentioned work. That's part of the caricature I'm talking about. I mentioned societies that were socialists where if you didn't do anything to contribute to the whole, you weren't able to participate in the benefits. So this isn't a question of whether work is good or bad. That is a caricature of socialism.
I wasn't arguing that.
Right. I just want
because everyone in socialism has to work. You just don't get what you work for, right? If I created a system and that system is beneficial to the world or a product that's beneficial to the world, I profit from that. And there's nothing wrong with that, I believe.
Logic. I think what you're trying to say is you don't get paid what you think you're worth. You get paid according to what the state thinks you're worth, which is always going to be next to nothing.
Dave, I want you to continue because I think this the thing that to achieve what you're trying to achieve, the only way we can get there is through acceptance of personal responsibility, which the best system or best form to date that has allowed for personal responsibility to be at the forefront is capitalism. Free market system.
I don't think that's true. I don't have any control over the nature of the society that I am in. So I am having to navigate a society that is structured. I have no control over the way that it's configured. So when I articulate my vision, I'm articulating it in the context of the fact that I live in the system as it exists. We have to figure out ways to navigate it in a way that is in our interest. What I am saying is that ultimately, right, because the system as it exists requires degradation and oppression and domination. What I am saying is that the people in the United States benefit from the luxuries that come as a result of centuries of economic dispossession.
Yeah, you're part of that.
Folks are continuing to benefit from that. So,
right.
So what
including you.
Naming a society in history, naming a society in history that expanded its borders from its original city-state that doesn't have the same sin. Naming one.
That's great right there. What I am saying, in fact, I was just reading earlier about one of the differences between the city-state structure of Greek society and the territorial state of many ancient African civilizations is that they were big societies that had a combination of urban and rural living that was in many ways more harmonious than we see in modern civilization, right? And so a big part of many of them was they didn't want to expand. Now some did, and there were some empires.
Again,
but there were many of them that did not want to expand.
Mansa Musa didn't try to expand. Like, dude,
I just said that there were some who did.
You're picking societies that started out. No one agreed to the dude who made up the idea because he didn't have the force to enforce it, right? You're saying that all of these people all of a sudden got along, kumbaya, people from different areas. Yeah, right. Someone used force somewhere at some point to start the conversation because that is a mechanic of the universe. It doesn't exist. There's no time in history. Dude, you want to believe the Bible? Cain clubbed Abel. You want to believe science? The caveman hit the guy with the rock. Dude, it doesn't matter. We've been killing each other since day one, and you're trying to point out to you, you make a false logic in your argument, and then you dismiss us when we're trying to restabilize that metric. The United States has made more progress towards human rights and civilization in the 250 years that it has existed than any other nation on earth. 1. 2, very simply put, you are making it some sort of white ethnicity argument, racial whatever, that conquering, slavery, profiting off of victory is their invention, and the United States is the first country to do that. Then you also skip over the part to get to the part where United States is a superpower, that without the Second World War and all of Europe being turned to rubble, the United States doesn't become a superpower. That had nothing to do with the U.S. In fact, the U.S. did everything in its fucking power to stay out of that war for as long as humanly possible. So you are drawing all this and then saying U.S. bad, but you don't give it credit. It can never atone for a sin every nation on earth has ever had. It can never be better, no matter how much progress it makes. Everyone it helps doesn't matter because people got hurt. But no one doesn't get hurt. Even though you don't want to talk about the systems that have tried the mentality you're trying to use because you're saying you'll do it differently, the living, breathing examples that we have of people trying to do it differently all end up in the same sort of bucket. But you disregard that as well. And somehow
I don't disregard it.
Seriously,
I disagree with you.
Man. That's where it falls short. Is we're showing you with evidence in your life that you're like, I can't control the system you live in. You should be thankful because if you lived in China, you'd have a social credit system. If you lived in UK, you wouldn't be able to talk about half the stuff we say on here. I mean, it's only because you were born here in America you can question America.
No, quick question, Dave. Are you Christian?
No.
Do you have any faith? Do you have a faith or anything?
I would say I'm spiritual. Yeah, see, you know what I mean? It's like I came on being respectful. We disagree. I haven't called anybody out their name. I haven't been rude to anybody on the screen. I've been the most polite person on this podcast. I come with a perspective that is well researched.
Good for you.
You can disagree. You can have differences of opinion.
That's killed almost 200 million people in 100 and some years.
So you say,
why would I be respectful of that? Why would I be? Hold on a second. Why would I be respectful of you as an American? You were born here. You were raised here.
If you don't want to be respectful,
no, stop. You benefited under a free market economy. You benefited under things being the way that they are, and yet the second you went to school, the second you went to a Western university, you acquired critical consciousness, and now you just fuck America all day long. Fuck the soil I was born in. That's disgusting to me. All because you have this crazy notion that if only we just did things according to Karl Marx, we just did this one thing according to a guy that abused everyone in his path, was a bum, didn't work, didn't wash, didn't do anything. He spent everyone else's money better than anything else, and yet here you are telling us that we should somehow just acquiesce to this foolishness.
I'm not telling you to acquiesce
that we hear all the time.
I haven't told you to acquiesce to anything. I think this conversation is running course. I've been super respectful. America is the settler responsible for the genocide and enslavement and misuse of billions of people around the world. But I choose to respect people.
But again, every communist system, the communist systems over the last 150 years has killed almost 200 million people. And your response to that is, well, capitalism has people dying in the streets. Okay, and meanwhile, y'all are trying to force a system that does not work, that is fundamentally incompatible with human nature, and because you're saying, you know, that this right here, real socialism has never been tried, you decide that's what you've been saying all night, sir.
That's not what I said.
That is exactly what you've been saying. That is
all right, guys, of what you've been saying. So look, Giovanni, I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we gotta have you back on, man.
Well, maybe, but I just want to say this last thing.
Yeah, we gotta have you back on.
No, because I want to say this last thing, right? Because, you know, one of the things that I came on because you started the show by saying that people tend not to be able to have conversations where they can have strongly different worldviews and disagree.
Here comes the emotional appeal, y'all.
See, and my expectation was that we would have that kind of respectful dialogue. I made it a point to be very respectful in the spirit, Giovanni, which you said to me via text and what you said at the top of this program. But I want to say is that in this program, it has not been reciprocity in terms of respect. So I just want to be clear for the record, for all of those that are going to watch this later.
Typical guilt card.
I want you to observe how this conversation went and see that I was at that. It's for y'all and me. If we are going to have a conversation in the future, I would like people to actually let people finish talking and actually have a dialogue. We can do that. I'm always down. Because no matter how a person feels about how I presented myself on this platform, can nobody see that I'm scared to represent my views in a hostile environment.
That's right. That's right.
Signal
your
virtue, communist. Appreciate it.
Signal your virtue, comrade.
Appreciate you coming on, Dayvon. We'll be in touch, brother. All right, so guys, that was Dayvon Love. And what concerns me about this, guys, honestly, he is involved with a lot of public policy in Baltimore and in Maryland. He has his disagreements with he's honestly in saying he has his disagreements with what, but he is very influential in the way public policy is created in Baltimore City, and in Maryland. I got to get better at my debate skills, but I will say this. I often say Baltimore is America's first communist city. There's a lot of government dependence. There's a lot of handouts given. There's a lot of the middle class has all been eliminated. You either have very wealthy, you're thinking about the White L, that Roland Park and kind of middle of the city wealthy area that is subsidizing the rest of the city. And it's done so in an effort to keep those people out. Keep poor people out, but it's also reinforced by a lot of socialist communist policy, and I think it's important to kind of see the views. And I forgive me, guys, for not moderating the discussion as well as I could have, speaking to the audience, but I think it's important, right, when you to allow people to speak, right? I think Operation Let Them Speak is the biggest thing that's going on right now, because when you allow these people to speak, it shows you. I think a lot of people can make rational decisions on their own.
Sorry, the masses are stupid. They're toaster.
I don't. I mean, they may be, but there's somebody that'll wake up.
You know how I know I'm right? The worst of us have the biggest followings on the internet. That's how I know.
I get it.
The reason,
not the ones who deserve it, not the ones who are scholarly, the biggest sellouts, the biggest clickbait. That's what gets people to listen. You have to have a conversation. But the fact is that this, I get where Isaiah's frustration comes from. I wish we could have been more respectful. I agree that we were a little out of hand. I take my responsibility. I tried by the end to get it under wraps. But when you talk this circular argument where you're saying, I'm not saying socialism when I'm saying everything that socialism is made up of without saying the word. I'm not saying communism because then I'm tied to all these failures. He's keeping it open so he can say, well, we're just going to do it the right way this time, doing exactly all the same things. And the only difference is that he just wants to destroy the only thing standing between it and total world destruction. So I personally think that we have to really take a minute and stop letting them just talk, right? They have to be held to account, right? You can't compare a 5,000-year-old civilization to someone who has a nuclear weapon. You can't compare what we do. It's like saying, oh, if George Washington was today, he'd hate what the country. Of course he was. He didn't have to make all the decisions and compromises and political maneuvering between now and then. And he has no idea why what he envisioned then to be now isn't happening. The reality is they have to be held to account. Like he's talking about some magical world that doesn't exist. We have testimonials of millions of people. And countries still not recovered from being communist. I'm sorry. He kept saying Venezuela. They eat their pets there, folks. They starve in the streets.
I thought that was a terrible example.
That was a horrible example. That was a horrible example of communism or socialism working. Venezuela's inflation rate went from 106% or something like that to 250%. Like, that's not socialism working. Before this is from Google, the AI overview. Before Hugo Chavez took power in 1998, Venezuela's economy was heavily dependent on oil, and despite great periods of wealth, experienced a significant downturn after a peak in the 1970s. By the time of Chavez's election, the economy was already weak with high poverty, though a strong middle class and high standards of living were present from 1950 to the early 1980s. You cannot tell me that that an economy that goes from 106% inflation to 250%, and in industry, just one industry, oil, which was producing, as you said earlier, 3 million barrels of oil a day, and then all of a sudden go to 800,000. Again, they are setting, the Venezuelan example is the worst example because they are literally setting their own people up for failure. The last thing, and I'll land my plane with this, the one thing that these people, that is prevalent in every single socialist argument, is that there is a complete hollowing out of the middle class. Mm-hmm. And that's why they hate individualism. That's why they hate individualism more than anything else. That's why they hate private property ownership, whether it's cars or houses. They are their war, their greatest war, is against individualism, because if the individual is protected, if the individual is empowered, then that means government works for the individual and not the other way around. These people want to be in charge of things. They want to control things. And that is why I kept hammering him, because essentially these people want to be in control of the systems of government. They want to be in control they want to seize the means of production. And unfortunately, in Baltimore, in Maryland, and in New York City, they've got it.
All over they have it in this country. That's the problem. We have 42 million communists, whether they realize it or not. We learned that in the government shutdown, dude. Our system is so askew from where it needs to be. That's one conversation. And him trying to lump that into the quality of America because we're in a precarious spot right now, fine, you're entitled to do that. But that disregards like the literal living history of the nation that's undisputed. Exactly. Right? Like, dude, these people, I see it all week on CT's panel. They make it's this, I can't let go of this sin in the past because this is what makes me unique. They're too identified to those sins. Man, if we can't ever get over it as a nation, we can't be a nation. Look, I'm not against saying slavery was bad, but all things have to keep moving through time. Look at what goes on now, dude. Look at how bad Jews have it because of the way and again, it's not that I'm minimizing anything, but the way we turn focal points of our victimization into things. Now look at how we get hammered for it and how we get overrun by it and taken not seriously as a result of it. The rising anti-Semitism, you hear you listen to any of the arguments, it's you did it to yourself. They blame us for our own, and we get even more angry and we throw the card down even harder. Learn from us, people. Learn from the mistakes we're making because we're a generation or two ahead of where your guys are at right now, man. I've been listening to people like, dude, I've been listening to my whole life with my people, this self-identification argument. And this needing to hold your past in order to make your future and shit. And all it does is keep you tied to the past. Yes, we have to remember those things. We have to memorialize them so we never forget. But you can't make today about 50, 100, 300, especially if every day since then the world is by the lead of the country you're trying to destroy, continuously trying to move away from those sins. You have to have forgiveness.
And that's why I asked, a little bit about the faith too, because, one of the cornerstones of a lot of faith is forgiveness. And at what point do you forgive what was going on? And I don't even know how you forgive because it never happened to you.
It's not forgive. I don't want me to be interpreted like that. It's recognizing that you have to remember it, but that's then. What have we done since then? Where are we here today? And measure today. And everybody is measuring back then. That's my point. I'm sorry. I just want to
exactly. I mean, because the moral standard shifts from one culture to the next for whatever, for various reasons. We accept certain things now that we didn't back then.
The second if the second actual forgiveness enters the picture, the revolution is over. I'm gonna say that. The second, remember, communism, socialism, whatever. Socialism is a cult of vengeance. And that's which is one of the reasons why I said if everybody just when I kept hearing him talk, I kept hearing Dayvon just talk, kept going in circles, and it was just like, and basically the only thing that just kept hitting my brain is if everyone just simply did what I wanted them to do, then the world would be right. All would be right in the world. And like if I were able to control what everyone says, what everyone does, if I am the state, right? If I own all the property, if I hold all the means of production, I can make things right. And it's perverse.
No, it's man
straight
playing
out of-
God.
It is exactly, and that's the one thing that I need for that your audience has to understand. Socialism seeks to make man God. Communism is a religion of the self made manifest by the state. These people hate everything that they cannot control. They hate everything around them that does not revolve around them. Okay, and which is why they seek such they seek control in such a psychopathic level. What they want is, again, they want to make sure, again, they want to control everybody's movement. They want to control what people eat, what people do. They want to throttle human thriving. Again, socialism is war on the individual. And in any system of government, any philosophical system that you can think of, if it is opposed or if it is opposed to or oppresses the individual, that is your enemy.
What I find interesting, though, and he says to look at scholars, and I'll go back and try to look some of these people up, because I do want to be, I want to know, like I just want to know, but it doesn't leave the pattern of what I've already learned about how communism works and how the subversion works, right? I mean, infiltrate, like the student riots. He mentioned that. Like, I don't need, that's one of the communist goals, is like form student riots, and the same thing is going on now with the Hamas.
Accept it, then he would have to accept that he's not original. He would have to accept that what he's saying isn't brand new. All the things that he's avoiding right. So that's my whole point. It's an apples to oranges argument. When you realize he's never going to not say those exact responses that Isaiah said he knew in advance. Look, dude, you know how well I know it? What I said became self-fulfilling prophecy from 5 seconds ago. It's going on in our chat right now. Right? Dude, they don't even realize how much they telegraph what they're going to do before they do it. The people who want to destroy, it's a revolution. They can't exist without having something to destroy. They accuse us of exactly what they are. The socialist is the person who wants to consume and conquer the most. The capitalist wants to be left alone the most, to thrive on the work of his own merit. You can't give everything and everybody, oh, this is easy, dude. Again, the Industrial Revolution comes along, and everybody says because agriculture is going away, we're going to have end of society. Dude, we will invent new things to call work.
It's the same thing that happened when the calculator entered the classroom.
We're doing it now. We're inventing different ways now. We're
YouTube is an invented market. The entire e-commerce market is an invented market. Dude, as technology grows, new work comes from it. Yes, there are always times of transition and uncertainty, like all technological leaps forward. But to say socialism, that we have to just pay everybody to stay home, is the answer, is lazy. This is what socialism breeds. It breeds laziness, inefficiency, lack of innovation. Dude, name me a socialist invention that's globally accepted as universally useful.
Exactly.
Like, come on, you people don't understand. You understand the Holocaust is caused because a guy decided he was going to prove you could grow grain under socialist concepts, and then wiped out all of the USSR's, like the genius of the people who say they're educated. And I read a book, and this guy, do you understand? We live in the age of where people get published because they make controversial claims based in pseudoscience. Oh, I have this degree and that degree. Dude, you can go watch Netflix. They all claim to have 1 million degrees, and all of them, when cornered, ultimately will tell you, well, it's a theory. It doesn't exist, the world you people are trying to build, this fantasy you're trying to create. There's only one way to get by: hard work. And making everyone the same doesn't encourage hard work.
You can follow me at Isaiah L. Carter, as you see on the screen below. Also, you can follow our show page, Apostate Radio NY. That's X. That's also our YouTube handle. You can check out, we're putting out back episodes right now of all of our shows, moving them from my personal YouTube to that one. I am not nice to socialists. You shouldn't be nice to socialists. Socialists want to enslave you. Forget the flowery, forget all of the appeals to emotion, forget all of the appeals to, you know, to social vengeance and all the to you know, hearkening to the past. That's satanic. The devil is the great accuser. The devil is the one who uses your past against you and seeks to keep you from achieving your greatness, from achieving God's purposes. What you witnessed today, ladies and gentlemen, is a prime example of why you should not be nice to or listen to socialists. You should fight socialism with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Communism is a pestilence that must be purged from the earth. And with that, I give thank you to you guys for having me on.
I do think we'll have enough content to close out the year if we just do response videos on this. And if anybody out there in the audience, if you guys want to do some response videos, yeah, just go ahead and do them and tag us in them.
I try, like, I get energetic. I admit it. Sometimes I'm not the easiest guy to have a debate with because I'll cut you off. I tried really hard, man. But when he just gets to the point where he's not answering the question by design, like it's willful apples to oranges when you're trying to hold apples to apples, I'm with Isaiah, man. McCarthy was right, dude. You have to read them out no matter. There's no skin folk is kinfolk in this battle, folks. I'm with the capitalists. This is, to quote Starship Trooper, this is a fight for the species, folks. Everywhere they let the government be the ultimate god and not us. Like, we're terrible at it. Don't get it wrong. We're bad at self-governance. We could do a much better job. I don't disagree, but our record is still far better than everyone else's.
Exactly.
This nonsense of America did all these things in nation building. All the countries that practice your will that you don't want, that you just want to dismiss, did it too, right? That's the apples to apple. And again, this is my point. You are correct. It's a vengeance because it's a cult of revolution. When the revolution is over, they revolt amongst their own. As soon as they'd seize power, the Pan-Africans would fight with the Islamists, would fight with the LGBT, would fight with all the groups that have bounded together. Because as soon as they're in control, then it's for who's the ultimate Politburo. Nothing changes. We're humans.
Our goal is to expose communism for what it is, right? We have to bring back shame to communism because it is my belief that communism is what's destroying our communities. It creates a system of dependence that is destructive to Black communities, white communities. It's destructive to America. It creates a sense of a state where the state is God, and that's just destructive to our country, individuals, families. And again, that's what we really want to expose here. And I appreciate the discussion today. The whole point of letting them speak, I hear you guys talking about we shouldn't let them speak. I'm still going to push back a little bit on that because I at least want them to finish their statement so we could respond and kill it, right? Because I just think I just want to hear the period at the end of what they say, then we can pounce.
The reason what Dayvon was doing was actually
filibuster.
It was methodical because one thing that your audience has to understand about communism, the way in which they argue, the way in which they criticize is in a manner that does so that announces the possibility of something different without ever saying what that different is. That's why he was filibustering. That's why he refused to answer objectively. Because again, he knows that if he answers the question objectively, he's going to lose. He loses the argument at that point.
Well, I think you guys got him to say, and it came up that he wants to see the end of America.
He does, yes.
Which I think if we're, it took us an hour to get there, but I think objectively that's the truth that maybe wasn't apparent, at least in the beginning. Guys, make sure you like, share, subscribe to Just the Guys podcast. But just follow the channel. Make sure you hit the notifications so you know when everybody goes live.